Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast, brought to you by the Manchester Evening News. My name is Stephen Railston. I am your host today. We're recording on a Friday afternoon just before Erik Ten Hag's press conference, and I'm joined by my colleague Samuel Luckhurst, who will be at Carroting later on. But before you make the trip down to Carroting, Samuel, I've got the pleasure of your time for around half an hour. How are you?
Indeed. I'm a lot better now that I've got over the Old Trafford pie that I made the mistake of having on Wednesday night. I can't warn any prospective fans or those in hospitality enough that you've got to avoid those pies. They're pretty lethal. I was not in a good way yesterday, but I'm in a much better way today, fortunately.
Well, we were playing a bit of five-a-side football last night, and Samuel had to dash a little bit early, but I'm not complaining at that because it means he can't go this for my miss from 6 yards, which was pretty embarrassing. But you can't really take the high ground on that because you did leave early, Samuel. But so we'll forget about that miss
I
from
did.
me. We'll
I
gloss
did.
over that.
The only good thing I did was make that save where I thought that you'd be looking to place it, and I just about managed to get down in time for it, but it probably exacerbated how I was feeling. So yeah, not in a good way yesterday, but a much better way today, fortunately.
Like David De Gea in his prime in 2017-18. Anyways, we'll get into the analysis of this week. There was obviously a 1-0 win against Brentford. They needed to respond. A 2-0 defeat up at St James's Park against Newcastle. That was a really disappointing performance, and I think the manner of the display as well. They were outfought in the duels, in the challenges, and Ten Hag basically said they lacked determination, didn't need the players, which is you just can't have that. But to come out at Brentford, a 1-0 win, it wasn't exactly vintage, was it, Samuel? But it was a response nonetheless, and 3 points on the board.
It was never going to be vintage, I didn't think, against a team that are very well set up, have a very good identity, have played pretty well against United in the last 18 months, certainly on two occasions down in West London, and they don't lose many games at all. So to have come away from it with a 1-0 win, given how poorly they played against Newcastle, I thought was pretty good going for United. And the first half performance overall, given the context of it, I think there was a lot for Ten Hag to get behind, and he sounded particularly pleased in his press conference afterwards. It would have been pretty churlish of any supporters to have been complaining that they only won 1-0 or they only had a handful of attempts on target. It didn't feel like that they tested David Raya on many occasions, other than Rashford rifling that goal in, which gave Raya no chance. But the way they controlled the game, the way they managed the game in the first half, they got the midfield balance right, with McTominay playing a more defensive-minded role. I've always said that as long as he's at United, that's the best use of him, because you're always going to have attacking midfielders at United. So the inclination to play McTominay in that role is not as great as it is perhaps for Scotland, even though he's played in a back three for Scotland, and has probably occupied a deeper role for Steve Clarke as well. But playing Sabitzer higher up, it was vindicated, primarily with the goal. It was a really well constructed goal. It was very deliberate. Lofted pass by Anthony for Sabitzer, good knockdown, really good finish as well. And apart from that one-on-one, and other than that, really, the closest Brentford came to scoring was David De Gea dithering with the ball at his feet when Tony charged him down and the ball bounced wide. So it wasn't much for spectacle. It was quite a humdrum atmosphere, but you never really sensed United were in danger of throwing that game away. I think in the 93rd minute there was an occasion where it might be Martial, McTominay, and possibly Fred or another player. They all gave the ball away, and normally if you're 1-0 up in a game and you're being that careless with possession with a minute left on the clock, there's going to be palpable anxiety. But you couldn't really twig it at all from the supporters, because Brentford were really, really quite tame. I mean, they are a different beast at home, I think, even though they, of course, went to City and won there this season. But it's mainly their home form and the home performances which have been their memorable moments in the Premier League. And as I said, United managed that game very well the other night in the first half, and in the end that was enough to see them through.
It's interesting the point you make about Brentford being stronger at home. I mean, after the 4-0 win earlier in the season and United's defeat at Newcastle, I thought they'd go for it. I thought they'd try start the game with intensity on the front foot and kind of take the game to United if Newcastle have laid that blueprint from the weekend, but as you just said, they were a bit tame, weren't they? And their approach surprised us, to be fair. I thought they'd give it more of a go at the start. Obviously, they improved throughout the game, and then as the second half came on, they did try a bit more and try find an equaliser. Who really stood out for you then, Samuel? I think Martinez on the night was fantastic. His defending was quality as usual. A few excellent challenges. There was one on Tony that really stood out to me. That's been clipped up a few times. And Anthony as well for me, Samuel. I thought he was really good against Newcastle, even though getting took off and substituted. I thought he was quite unfortunate. And I thought he had a good game, and I thought he stood up and he was counted, which, do you know what? I was impressed by that. He worked really hard.
He was the most creative of the forwards again, I would say. I agree with you. At Newcastle, the bar was set very low from the forwards, but he was pretty unfortunate to come off, and he did seem rather peaked about it when he was substituted by Ten Hag. They had a quick conflab, and Anthony was concealing his mouth, which is always a giveaway that he's saying something that he doesn't want anybody to be able to read into whatsoever. But it was a very good pass for Sabitzer. His collaboration with Dalot was a lot better. I mean, it's a curious dynamic that Dalot and Anthony have had, and that where they're two Portuguese speakers, you'd immediately think that, well, they should get on like a house on fire, or there should be, you know, a pretty good collaboration there. But they actually, you know, they've had a few confrontations over the course of the season, and it happened long before the Newcastle game at the weekend, where there was this clip of them arguing with each other. But they were a lot better the other night, and Dallow's by and large a very supportive teammate, and still is with Anthony. It's not like they hold anything against each other. If anything, the fact that they can be heated in those flashpoints should be viewed as a positive, because it shows that they both care, and they both want to get to the level that they're capable of getting to. And if they're not at that level, they're going to be frustrated about it. But I agree with you, what you said on Martinez. He was by far and away the best player. Again, we've said that a number of times this season, and for the umpteenth time the other night, he approached the tunnel as probably United's best player. It was interesting what Ten Hag said afterwards about Fernandes initiating the possession plays, where he was playing a little bit deeper, and Sabitzer was going forward a bit more. And Fernandes was quietly effective. It wasn't a spectacular performance from him, but I think that's what his season has been about, by and large, in that he's not got the numbers that he has had of previous campaigns, but I do think he's become a better player this season. And there are times where it's a case of less is more. You don't need to be particularly wasteful with the ball. I think the only thing he did in the second half, which was remotely memorable, was when United had possession, were keeping it, were playing it patiently, and then he just had a pot shot from 30 yards or something like that, and it went well into the Stretford end. And so there are times where he will be impatient, but that's what you get with him. I think it's pretty impressive the way he has finessed his game at times this season. It was certainly obvious on the pre-season tour that he was being a bit more prudent with the ball. He wasn't always looking for the killer pass or looking for the pot shot to get an assist or get a goal. And although the numbers will show that he's had better seasons at United in past campaigns, this could eventually be remembered as his best season, because he's had to take on the leadership responsibilities. It's a new manager. There's been more pressure on United, etc. They have won a trophy as well. So he's certainly someone who Ten Hag was always going to look forward to managing because of his mentality. And although he's not a talent who's completely aligned with what Ten Hag wants from a playmaker or someone who's certainly playing that number 10 role, he has adapted, and Ten Hag's, there's been a little bit of give and go between them. And so far, it's been a pretty successful manager-captain relationship.
There was obviously just one change from the Newcastle defeat. I think it's fair to say we probably expected maybe at least one more after that result. But Weghorst was moved to the bench. Sancho came in, obviously started on the left. Before we get into Weghorst, Samuel, because we'll look at him in the next part, I wanted to just end with a bit of chat about Sancho, because for me, a bit of an indifferent performance again, and I feel like that's just becoming a reoccurring theme when I'm watching Sancho. I'm not sure if you agree with that assessment, but he didn't really do too much to really catch the eye. He wasn't exactly offensive in the game, and I think that's just it's happened. It's keep on happening when he plays. He's not really taking his chances, in my opinion. I think he's got 10 goals now and 4 assists during his time at the club. Obviously, I had some time off, but at what stage do we start to say to him, right, you really need to deliver now, because we're going into the summer, Ten Hag's second season at the club, and I feel if he doesn't get it right next season, then I don't want to say his days are numbered, because I almost feel a bit harsh saying that, because is he 22, 23 now, sorry, so he's still got time on his side, but he needs to start performing a bit better, doesn't he, I think.
The other night, he didn't do much right. He didn't do much wrong.
That's what I mean, yeah.
It was
A
a
bit
6 out of
indifferent,
10
wasn't it?
performance.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you're a player of that profile, you have got to do more, particularly if you've not done a great deal already this season. And there is the mitigation of him having what was it, 3 months out, pretty much, or nearly 3 months, I think. But that was, that was of his own choosing. That was a decision taken with Ten Hag. We've gone through why they took those measures, chapter and verse. He was deemed not fit on a physical side of things. There was a mental side of things that he needed to clear up as well. And you have to be quite. Sometimes you have to deal with these players with kid gloves, and I'm sure there comes a point though, and Ten Hag did say it, that you do start to get impatient, because you've got a potential game changer there. He's a player that the club have invested a hell of a lot of money in, but unfortunately for Sancho, from what I've been told, that there is certainly impatience behind the scenes at United, and that he is being overtaken by other forwards there. And looking ahead to the summer, where United are they're not concealing anything about it whatsoever. They know that there have to be a lot of outgoings in the summer because of these financial sustainability rules that they have to meet, and that's irrespective of the ownership situation as well. And if a club were to come in with an appealing offer for Sancho, whatever that may be,
What would be an appealing
it's
offer
not.
for Sancho now? What kind of price do you think we're
Well,
talking off his performances for United?
You'd be making a loss, wouldn't you? It would be, unless you've got someone like, I don't know, Todd Burley making an offer where there's every chance they'll pay over the odds. You're going to be making a loss, and that's the case with a few United players who are likely to go in the summer. Again, as I've said before, the best source of income for them, I think, would be through the academy players. One, because United haven't paid a transfer fee for them. Two, they're in their 20s. If you think about McTominay or Dean Henderson, they're Premier League proven. They've come through one of the most esteemed, famed academies in world football. And so they've got a lot going for them there to be able to command good prices for them. With Sancho, everybody knows that he came to United as a very expensive addition. He's not cut it. There are issues there that were public knowledge, certainly, with him not playing for as long as he did earlier this season. And it's also a bit of a hard sell. Certain clubs may look at that and think, well, has he got the coping mechanisms to be able to operate for us at a high level? But it is a pity for United and for him, because when you've seen him in full flight, he's a cracking player. But when I watch him, I can never quite understand why he feels the need to bring the tempo down. Sometimes it's like watching Dimitar Berbatov, but with Berbatov there was some method to it. That was the way he played as well. Nobody expected him to start moving through the gears. With Jadon Sancho, when he gets the ball, you expect him to operate at 100 miles per hour. We saw him do it for Borussia Dortmund, and he's never really quite hit that level with United. He had a pretty decent 2-month spell last season after the January internationals, and I think what reflected well on him there was that he had this, unhappy moment in his private life. One of his relatives passed away. He missed a couple of games in late January. He came back into the team in early February, and he hit the ground running, and he was brilliant. And he had the backing of a manager who had wanted to sign him for RB Leipzig as well, in Ralf Rangnick. And I just thought that he would have been very well suited to how Erik ten Hag wants to play, and he was excellent in pre-season as well. But we've said so many times how misleading preseason can be, and that we'll watch a player in preseason, they'll be brilliant, and then when the season starts, they're not truly at it. And in fairness to Sancho, in the start of the season, he was doing okay. He certainly had some key contributions, scoring some very important goals. But even then, the performance level was still quite a way off from what you'd hope it would be with him. And when Garnacho comes back as well, because he is going to come back before the end of the season, as United have said, there's going to be greater competition there. And at some point or another, someone's going to have to lose out, and someone's not going to be in the matchday squad.
I think there's a bit of an identity crisis on the pitch going on as well for Sancho, because I'm not sure which position is actually his best at the moment, and it must be hard to find form and find rhythm when, I mean, he doesn't deserve to start, but you can't find a consistent position. He's played on the left, he's played on the right, he's even been played as a number 10 this season. He's probably best actually on his left during his time at Dortmund, even though, ironically, he was signed to play on the right. And if you look on the left, as you've just said, you've got Garnacho and Rashford, you've got Fernandes in attacking midfield, and you've got Antony on the right. So where does he fit in that? It's starting to become a bit of a puzzle. I'm sure we'll have some answers soon. I'm sure it is, isn't it? And we'll talk about it a bit more, no doubt. We'll end there for part one, and we'll be back for part two with some chat about Wout Weghorst. Now, Samuel, Weghorst was obviously dropped to the bench. He'd actually started 18 consecutive games since signing on loan, which is quite amazing, isn't it? Is it 19 in the end, including Newcastle? Yeah. So, I mean, if his agent, when his agent informed of the interest in January, he probably laughed. He probably didn't believe him. But then he goes and starts 19 games for Manchester United. Finally dropped to the bench. I think it was about time. The Newcastle performance was probably the straw that broke the camel's back. Ten Hag probably couldn't justify his inclusion. It kind of raised my eyebrows last week in his press conference when he left the door open to a permanent deal. Did that surprise you guys at Carrington when he kind of answered that question? And do you think it is really possible that we could see Weghorst continue? Because he obviously lacks quality in front of goal. He does have merit off the ball. We've discussed that. But at the end of the day, he's just not good enough to be a striker for Manchester United, is he?
No, not at all. And the effort has been there, and I think that's why some fans cut him a little bit of slack or are reluctant to really get on his back, because he is running around and trying to do things. But as you said, the Newcastle game, I think really that Betis game, the return leg out in Seville, he was really, really bad in that. Then he was even worse against Fulham. Then he was even worse against Newcastle. And I suppose it really said a lot about Weghorst, and that he was the only player dropped the other night, and it wasn't Anthony Martial coming in to replace him either. That was confirmation that Ten Hag knew we've got to get him out of the team now, because he's not up to it, and we're not even going to replace him with the number 9 everybody expected him to be replaced with. It was Rashford who went up front, which is an imperfect situation, because Rashford is at his best off the left, but credit to him, he has been scoring goals when he's played up front as well this season, and the Brentford game was another. Ten Hag is very defensive of Weghorst. I don't think he said a bad word about him in any of the press conferences. I mean, he has cropped up in the last two. Last week, as you said, he said that he wouldn't be against possibly signing him permanently. When I asked him about that last month, or it might have been February, I can't quite remember, but he said it was too early to say whether he would want him on a permanent basis. When I asked him about, Gary Neville's analysis the other night, Gary Neville said that he shouldn't be at United, and I also reminded Ten Hag of that quote he gave to Football International in January when he said Manchester United had been signing average players for years, and that's not good enough. And nobody can say Weghorst is above average. He is average at best. But Ten Hag, rather than dwelling on that, he decided to focus on Gary Neville's rather provocative comparison between Weghorst and Ronaldo. He didn't mention Ronaldo, but he didn't need to. And it was obviously Neville put that chart up about United's record with Weghorst and record without Ronaldo. And then there was that pointless debate, or that, borderline goading Jamie Carragher was getting at, where he's trying to say, "Are you saying you'd pick Ronaldo over Weghorst?" I mean, Ronaldo didn't want to be at United this season. Weghorst does want to be at United. I mean, that's a start. And Neville even said Weghorst is not fit to lace Ronaldo's laces, which is completely true. But it's a completely pointless debate. Like, we watched Ronaldo early in the season. He didn't want to be at United. We saw the interview. Uh, he was what he said was an absolute disgrace. He's talking about the club betraying him when the betrayal was on his part. So, I mean, sometimes you watch these pundits and they are saying things just to be clipped up, just to go viral, just to dominate the news websites the next morning, and it is really becoming a bit tedious now. But going back to Weghorst as an asset, if you can call him that, for United, we've said before his 2 goals have been on the rebound. His link up play, which I thought was pretty decent in his first weeks, that seems to have vanished. He said himself he was. I'm sure I can be beeped out here, but he said after the Netherlands played against Gibraltar, he said he was, which, fair play
I
to him.
liked his honesty.
He's that honest
Exactly.
in his
Yeah.
summary. Exactly. Yeah. You've got some very very thin-skinned footballers out there who would never ever dream of thinking they played that badly. Never mind saying it. But he's not oblivious to how bad he has been for club and country of late. But it's still a quandary for United that they've got 2 number 9s there, and in some ways they've not got 2 number 9s, and that Weghorst doesn't score, Martial doesn't start. Maybe he will against Everton. He certainly needs to at some point, but he's been training for 4 weeks with the squad now. When Ten Hag told me the other night that he's still not game fit enough, so it's until they sign that new long-term striker or new starting striker in the summer, I suspect it will be a recurring issue between now and the end of the season.
I mean, that's why Weghorst has had to start so many games, because Martial has been sidelined and he spent more time
Yeah,
on the treatment table than the pitch. That's a nice little segue. We're going to talk about Martial because, as you've just said, you did ask him in his press conference, Ten Hag, about Martial, and he said that he's not fit enough to start, which for me was quite baffling because, as we've said, he's trained for 4 weeks now. He did some light training before those 4 weeks, so he's actually been in training obviously longer. He should be up to speed by now. And that really raises some red flags to me if there hasn't been 1,000 already about his body and his load and his condition and what he can take. He's contracted obviously until next year, and I think the problem is, Samuel, no one's going to want to buy him, are they? No one's going to invest into a player like Martial when you just know he's not going to be able to start that many games for you in a season. So coming into the summer, obviously a striker is the priority, but could we possibly see the arrival of multiple strikers, of maybe 2 strikers? Because Weghorst, perhaps, obviously, you can return to Burnley. Martial is injured all the time. And you're kind of back to square one with that problem. If you get Harry Kane, for example, or Victor Osimhen, they should start the bulk of the games. But you're going to need someone else, don't you? Someone reliable who can support either one of those strikers.
yeah, and that's where you have to possibly look at being a bit creative. And certainly, I think looking at United's midfield, where Casemiro has been absent, I think if Guardiola was, say, in charge of that midfield, I reckon he'd have done something pretty drastic, like
McTominay up
taking a
front.
defender in midfield, or who knows what. But we've seen John Stones. I mean, Stones last week against
He was
Liverpool
excellent,
was
wasn't
terrific
he?
as
Yeah,
a
he was
midfielder.
superb.
Yeah, he's always been a very good footballer. He's not always been a particularly good defender, but certainly I think from watching him at Everton, there was always scope there that he could actually be one of those players to move into midfield. And we've seen a lot of right backs move into midfield in recent years. The main one's been Lahm and Kimmich at Bayern Munich. It's probably still something that would be advisable at Liverpool, given that Trent Alexander-Arnold. I mean, you're probably too young to remember this, the show in the 90s on the BBC, Can't Cook, Won't Cook. With Alexander-Arnold, it is can't defend, won't defend, and it's probably in Liverpool's interest to finally play him there. But as I think Anthony has played up front for United, or at least moved there during the game this season. Obviously, Rashford played there the other night, but he has got a fair amount of experience of playing as a centre forward for United. I think maybe the best case scenario for United would be that, as you say, that they do want to sell Martial in the summer, and I think they could still raise pretty decent funds for that. They'll make a loss, but again, it's besides the point. I think they could still uh, get a decent fee for him, but it's a very, very small pool that you're looking at of clubs who would have the money and have the inclination to say, yes, we will take a player who's scored not even 20 goals in the last 3 seasons, including this one, who's not completed 90 minutes in the league game since January 2021, who's had 5 separate injuries so far this season, and is still not deemed fit enough to start 4 weeks into squad training. There would be some managers out there would be like, why are you even suggesting him as a possibility for us to sign in the summer if this is his conditioning, or if he's that physically brittle. And Ten Hag also harked back to his injuries in previous seasons. I mean, looking at this season, I think Marshall's had hip injury, back injury, Achilles injury, hamstring injury. There was another injury. I think he's had 5 separate injuries so far this season. Um,
It's
going
impressive.
back to going back to the tail end of 2021, he missed pretty much the whole of the running with a knee injury that prevented him from playing at the Euros. And just looking at his injury stats for last season, he missed a few games for Sevilla with a muscular injury. There was another knee problem for United, apparently in December, and another one is just in October. It's just says fitness, which is quite an interesting and original injury specified. It comes under the column as injury as well. It just says fitness. But looking at some of the others, we've got influenza, thigh muscle strain, ruptured knee ligament, groin strain, another influenza as well. So that's I think that might be transfer marks being a bit too technical about the reason for his absence on those occasions. Uh, so I think in some ways it would suit for United that they can't suit Martial. They do get a striker in, and Martial very much knows his place. That you are backup striker, and if you don't like it, you and your agent can try and force a move, and that might suit United a little bit more, where they actually, they rile Martial rather than making him feel comfortable in this environment. But as we've seen before, when a striker does come in, Martial and his agent have got form for kicking off, for not liking the way things are panning out. And whether it was getting the new contract in January 2019 or getting the loan move to Sevilla, they have got what they wanted. So maybe United need to be a bit tactical in the way they go about trying to get Anthony Martial out the door, but it's far from a guarantee that he will go in the summer because of all the red flags that you could be waving about his fitness and also his lack of goal scoring. I mean, the talent is there. Gary Neville said it last week. Everybody knows Martial, but because everybody knows Martial for the way he is, it's probably going to deny him having a great career at United.
I won't hold my breath with Martial's fitness. It was surprising actually, obviously last summer or last year when Newcastle had their takeover, and they're obviously linked with Martial, and it kind of goes
Oh, he
against what
was,
their
wasn't he?
transfer
Yeah.
policy is. So isn't it? Their signings have been
Chris Wood
hits,
came in
and
instead.
wow, probably a better goal scorer. He's definitely not. That's far too harsh and untrue. We'll talk about one of my,
Too
my
far.
favourite topics, Samuel. We'll talk about De Gea's distribution quickly before we look ahead to Everton. It was kind
Yeah,
of
you were very
highlighted again.
provocative with your piece yesterday.
I
I saw.
was, in
Yes.
hindsight, I thought it maybe was a bit too much actually, but I wanted. It was a wider point, obviously, about his distribution, and it was highlighted again, as you mentioned earlier, with the Ivan Toney charging down the ball, and another day that goes into the back of the net. His kicking was poor again. But we've talked about it at length. The question I wanted to ask you is, you've just discussed Dean Henderson there, and you said potentially sell him this summer. And I found it interesting that the discussion under the article yesterday was fans debating basically whether Henderson could come in. And I know I've kind of brought up the point a few times, and you and Ty have kind of laughed it off because of his comments. But is there a possibility that he could be, stay at the club, come back from Forest, despite his comments?
I think the trouble is that United want to get De Gea tied down a new contract. To that point,
And need to
it's
raise some
game
money as well.
over,
Yeah.
and there's that as well. They've not played it out well. the whole goalkeeping situation, because it seemed like there was a clear opportunity for them to have a succession plan, in that De Gea sees out his contract, and they know full well there's not going to be a lot of resale value, because there aren't going to be that many takers prepared to pay the best part of 400 grand for a goalkeeper who is now, is he 32? I think De Gea, I think he might be.
Just turned, yeah.
Even though that's still quite young for a goalkeeper, you have not got a lot of clubs out there at the moment who are desperate for a goalkeeper of that profile, even though he's still exceptional at stopping the ball. But of course, the turning point really was Henderson getting COVID in the summer of 2021 during pre-season, which laid him low. He'd been told he was going to be number one. De Gea started the season because Henderson was too unwell. De Gea did pretty well, particularly away at Wolves, where he made a great save from Roman Saiz in that 1-0 win. And then when Henderson was fit and he came back in, because it was Ole Gunnar Solskjaer as the manager and who didn't like making tough decisions, he found out that, no, you're still number two because David started the season well and we can't drop him. A stronger manager, if he told Henderson, you're going to be my number one, he'd have just put him back in the team. You've seen it before with managers. They don't beat about the bush. It's the classic, the cliched, no room for sentiment in football. But Henderson, obviously, as everyone saw with that interview he gave in the summer, I think he was, when he was asked which team would he like to play against the most this season, he said Man United, but I can't do that. And so he's lost a bit of goodwill with some United fans, but some United fans need to make their mind up, because they really did abhor the whole, when it was the competition between De Gea and Henderson a couple of years ago. It was needlessly tribal,
unhealthy,
and
wasn't
I
it?
found it. I found it really peculiar that some Manchester United supporters from a certain demographic were actively trying to undermine an academy goalkeeper and someone who could be a future England number one as well. But that's the way of the world at the moment. There's this obsession with knocking down English players or British players. We've seen it with Harry Maguire, Luke Shaw's copped it, Rashford has copped it. As football journalists, we don't discriminate. If a player is rubbish, we don't think of his nationality at all. We just say he's been rubbish. If he's been brilliant, we say he's been brilliant, irrespective of his nationality. Nationality doesn't come in it, but there is a warped contingent of supporters who, I mean, the irony is they will say we have an agenda when it's they're the ones who have the agenda, because we're in this era now where fans don't support clubs, they support players more than clubs, or they support the more exotic element of football, of the transfers, of having, sexy sounding players playing for their clubs, which I can never quite understand. So ultimately, with a goalkeeping situation, United are trying to get De Gea to sign a new contract. Why would Dean Henderson want to stick around for that? And they can get resale value on him. He's been out injured for a while at the moment, so his value will have dwindled because of that. I would still say that he is, at the very minimum, a £30 million goalkeeper. He's what, 25, 26, Premier League proven. He has got experience with the England national team as well. He's come through the United Academy. And I've said for a while, I think he'd be really good for Tottenham if Tottenham can somehow prize him from United. So, but ultimately, is De Gea the right man going forward for United?
I
I'd
know
probably
you
say
hate
no.
talking about contracts, Samuel. I know you absolutely despise it, but would it be a
Oh,
complete
not all
shock?
of them. Not all of them.
Would it be a complete shock to see these negotiations with De Gea fall through? They've gone on for a little
No.
while now. Do you know? It's still a possibility, really, isn't it? I mean, Ten Hag, he's had enough evidence. You wouldn't think a few weeks would suddenly change his mind one way or the other. But I guess it has to be right for both parties, doesn't it? And if United are laying down terms, I still think it's not beyond the realms of possibility myself. When you just see the way he plays sometimes, and you think long term, how far is this going to reset the rebuild, or how far is it going to delay it or stall it going into next season? Because that is the way Ten Hag wants his team to play, doesn't he? That's no secret. He wants to play from the back.
Yeah, and Ajax did actually want Dean Henderson on loan last season as well, while Ten Hag was the manager at Ajax at the time. The strange thing with De Gea is that because of his contract situation, United do not want to extend it by a year, because automatically it means he'll be on more money next season. And one of the purposes of this new contract that they're trying to negotiate with him is to have him on a lower salary. So it's a peculiar position, and it's almost an admission that of imperfection as well. And that if you're trying to get a player on a new contract and also agreeing to a salary reduction, having whilst trying to avoid paying him more money, that would suggest that he's maybe not the right player to tie down on a new deal. And given De Gea's age, you'd imagine that deal would be a 3-year minimum. And the more you think about it, I just think that maybe the best case scenario for United is that they just have to sign a new goalkeeper, which would be a shame because they've had a world class goalkeeper for well over a decade. They've nurtured a very good goalkeeper at academy level who may be the answer, or I should say might not be the answer, might be the answer. I think his opportunity has come and gone, Dean Henderson's, because of the way events have transpired. But they do not want to be in a position in the summer where they have to sign a goalkeeper because they want to sign a striker. Ten Hag wants a midfielder. If Maguire or Lindelof go, they will need a new centre back. If De Gea was to go, and depending on Dean Henderson's situation, you're going to need a new goalkeeper of some sort. So you're talking about an entirely new spine of the team that you're getting in one summer, having invested a hell of a lot of money last summer. So ideally for United, it would suit them not to do that this summer at all. But it's needs must. You know, you look at the squad situation. Can you really park the goalkeeping situation for another year? I mean, with Dean Henderson, as I said, the intervention of COVID that seemed to kill his chance of being United's permanent number one. And strange things can happen in football. Maybe another strange event will come along and change things, and Henderson might get back into the team. But I just can't see it for the main reason that United, Ten Hag also said last week he wants to keep De Gea. So De Gea is probably going to get a new contract. Henderson, there's the resale value there. Outgoings are essentially in the summer. So that's probably the way it's going to be. But it's an imperfect situation.
Definitely is. I mean, he has made slight improvements with his feet, to be fair. I think his distribution has been marginally better this season, but it's still a weakness, and it's become a bit of a press trigger for teams. You saw that with Newcastle at the weekend, and Jacob Murphy's comments after the game discussing how he saw De Gea with the ball being ponderous, and Newcastle knew to push up and press, and that's how they got their goal, didn't they? The opening one. We'll leave it there for part 2. We'll be back in a moment for part 3, where we'll look ahead to the Everton game on Saturday afternoon. So it's the Toffees that are visiting, on the subject of a goalkeeper who can't kick for toffee. No, that's harsh. The Toffees visiting Old Trafford on Saturday afternoon. Sean Dyche is staging a mini revival, maybe, fair to say. He's got them organised again. They're still not much of an attacking threat, but they definitely are more organised since his appointment. A big draw for them against Tottenham, and what a finish from United Academy graduate Michael Keane in midweek. So they'll be pretty confident, or have some optimism of getting a result at Old Trafford. But it's not really a stadium where Everton perform well, is it, Samuel? What are your expectations for Saturday?
It could be slightly similar to Brentford, minus the goal threat from Everton. They've just not got a goal scorer, which, if you're in a relegation dogfight, you always worry for that team's prospects. But credit to them, they've not lost any of their last 4. They had the character to come from behind twice against Chelsea. They had the character to come from behind against Tottenham the other night. I mean, Tottenham were extremely lucky to get anything from that game. Everton had everything Tottenham didn't have, pretty much. I mean, Tottenham was so uninspiring. And Dyche has gone in there. They are a much more organised and tougher team to play against than when Frank Lampard was manager, and Lampard is now Chelsea manager. So go and work that one out. Yeah, exactly. But where Everton are a more resolute team, and they gave a good account of themselves, in fairness, in the Cup game in January when Lampard was still manager, and it was a really watchable Friday night game. They got it to 1-1. I think they had a goal disallowed at 2-1 just for a just offside. I think it was Calvert-Lewin who might have been slightly ahead. But it would be a more watchable contest, I think, tomorrow if Calvert-Lewin was playing, because when he's at his optimum, he's a very good striker. But unfortunately for Everton, he's not been at that level for probably the best part of 2 years, and that's a worry for them. Doucouré is I've always quite liked as that level of Premier League midfielder who can impose himself, who's got good technical ability, who's physical. But obviously he's suspended for the game this weekend. But it seems like individually, I mean, when I looked at Everton's squad at the start of the season, I really did think they might go down. But the perception has changed quite a bit, in that Michael Keane was out in the cold under Lampard. He's come in under Dyche, having played for Dyche at Burnley. And although he had a very eventful game the other night where he rather clumsily conceded the penalty with the foul on Romero, he has got more belief about him. Tarkowski, when the ball goes into the opponent's area and he's up for a corner or a free kick, he seems to win every header. It's like the ball's a magnet to his head. So they've got some attributes for United to keep tabs on, and United have had 2 tough games against them this season. I think, but for Rafael Varane header in added time at Goodison, Jordan Pickford, of all people, might have been nodding in an equaliser when he came up for a late corner. So
Pickford.
I know. So I don't necessarily think this will be a game for United where it will be straightforward. A little bit like in midweek, if they, however they do it, if they get through this week with 2 wins, that's back on track after the setback of last week and playing as poorly as they did against Newcastle. I certainly expect United to win. They've got the firepower. It seems like Eriksen might at least be on the bench. So if they are in need of someone to pick the lock, there are a few players to have better than him to bring on in a game. They'll have other game-changing options as well. So although Everton, I think, could make a decent contest of it, I still think that United should be winning this one.
Tottenham are a strange team for me. They get the goal, and deservedly so. Obviously, Kane converts the penalty, and then they just start sitting off, don't they? And they were passive.
It was
The
bizarre.
pressure on.
It was really bizarre.
Understand that. Yeah, a Premier League team, supposedly a top side, and that was baffling. That it really was. Regarding the midfield for the game, Samuel, I've been kind of banging the drum for Fred to play in the last few weeks, and Ten Hag has ignored my music playing, and he's played Sabitzer, McTominay, and Fernandes, and that selection was perhaps a bit baffling the last few weeks, and we questioned it in midweek as well before Brentford. But as you said earlier, McTominay had a good game, a bit more defensively, and Sabitzer had a really good night as well, to be fair to him. So would you retain those 3 for Everton, or do you think it's time now, obviously two games in a week, for Fred to come in? Maybe his energy will be needed in this one.
It's a good question. I mean,
it almost seems harsh to drop those players, doesn't it, after those performances, because they kind of deserve to start again. But before that game, I was questioning it.
Yeah, it is a tricky one in that they did pretty well as a combination the other night, McTominay and Sabitzer, but you still think of the Fulham game, West Ham, Newcastle. It's like one swallow does not a summer make, but they're bound to have more of the ball. United against Everton, they had a fair amount of possession against Brentford the other night. I think they had more than 70% at half time, which I didn't expect them to have that much of the ball. I thought Brentford might have more about them and try and impose themselves more, but they really didn't, which was bizarre given that Tony and Mbeumo are good goal threats, and they've got goals against United in the past as well. They've really given United a chasing. But with Everton, the way they play, and it'll probably be Damari Gray through the middle in a strikerless formation. Everton have got a few good draws, or a couple of good draws recently against Chelsea and Tottenham. And this would be the hat-trick if they were to be able to avoid defeat and get a point at Old Trafford. So there's maybe an argument to bring Fred in because you want a bit more attacking impetus in midfield, but that still raises the question as to who's going to be holding the fort there, because Everton have got some mercurial players on the counter attack. I mean, Iwobi's been pretty good for them as a midfielder. I think Damari Gray as a talent is excellent. There's always just been the lack of consistency to his game. Dwight McNeil's a pretty good winger and handy in those situations as well. Onana has done, given given the way Everton's season has panned out, I think he's been reasonably decent for them. He's a Belgian international, and it seems like he's a starter for the national team as well. So that's always going to be on Ten Hag's mind, of getting that balance right. But he has played Fred and Sabitzer together before, and although they've not convinced, United have got decent results by and large. So it would be peculiar if they were to go, because the next time Fred could start would be next Thursday, and he probably won't start given the availability of Casemiro and Eriksen. So that would be 4 weeks without a start for him, which would seem a waste. But he did. The key game that he should have been starting was against Newcastle, and there's very little point lingering or allowing that to linger now. So I'd probably still be tempted to bring Fred in, but I really wouldn't be surprised if it's McTominay and Sabitzer, given that they did come good eventually against Brentford in midweek.
If it wasn't for Joe Linton at Newcastle, I'd probably say Iwobi's the most improved player in the league. He's been fantastic, and he was really good against Tottenham. He was all over the pitch again.
Yeah.
Monday night.
I think he was good. I think he was quite good last season for them in the tail end as well, when it might have been Lampard who actually moved him to central midfield.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
It's come off for Everton to a certain extent anyway.
Just looking at the table now, Samuel, before we end, obviously United are fourth, but on goal difference, Newcastle are third. Had to get that in on both joint on 53 points. But I thought it was worth talking about the goal difference situation, because Newcastle are on plus 26 currently, and Man United are on plus 5. Now, that obviously highlights the lack of attacking firepower, doesn't it, really? It's with the exception of Rashford, there has been a lack of goals elsewhere in the team. Is there a scenario that goal difference could be quite important, do you think? Because it is all of a sudden looking quite tight around those Champions League places, isn't it?
It is, but I would, whether they finish third or fourth, I'd probably expect United to be clear of the next team below them as far as the points deficit goes. The goal difference is embarrassing. There are no two ways about that. For it to be that low, it's a reflection on the lack of.
When you think Newcastle scored 5 goals against West Ham, and that's the goal difference currently, obviously plus 5 for United. And Newcastle scored 5. That just shows you how poor it is, really, isn't it? You'd love to see United put a team to the sword in the Premier League, and they've not really done that this season.
They've just not done it this season, have they? No, they've. Have they scored 4 goals in a Premier League game? They may have. I'm struggling to think, but they put 4 against Betis, 4 against Villa. But you looking at the 4 column now. You've got Arsenal 70, City 71, United on 42, Newcastle on 46, 5th and 6th, Tottenham and Brighton. They're both in the 50s, well ahead of United. Aston Villa only 3 goals shy of United. Liverpool have scored more than them. Brentford have scored more than them. So however way you look at it, it's not good. And logically, if a team has got that goal difference, it'd be, right, you've got to sign a striker in the summer, and that's what they fully intend to do. And it was interesting what Ten Hag said the other night. He said that you need 2 players who are going to score more than 15 goals a season. United don't have that. I mean, the irony is, I say that they actually might do come the end of the season, because I think Fernandes is on 10. So he might be able to creep up to that 15 level. But I think if you were to tweak Ten Hag's statement, you'd say you want 2 players who are going to get a minimum of 20 goals a season. And you're not looking for, I mean, Rashford should hit 30 goals this season. If you can get 2 players in who are going to get above the 20 goal mark, I think that's certainly that's the way forward. Going back to the treble season, Cole got 24, York got 29. I think Solskjaer got 18 that season, so he was only 2 shy of the 20 goal mark. And United at the moment, the way this season's panned out, they don't have those players with that ruthlessness. Martial has only ever broken the 20 goal barrier once during his United career. You look at the other players in that team, and the only other player other than Rashford who would ever get close to it is Fernandes, who did so a couple of seasons ago in that kind of like strange behind closed doors campaign. So sometimes you can be a little bit dismissive of it. It's an anomaly, but by and large, it's the responsibility has fallen on Rashford. And also, it's the amount of goals they've conceded. I mean, United
I
have
was just about to
conceded
say that. We're talking about
37 goals this season.
is it 16 goals against Arsenal, City, and Liverpool away, which is just not good
Yeah,
enough. The away form against top sides.
Newcastle have obviously had the best drilled defence all season, and I'd certainly have Pope and Trippier in the team of the season. But it's rather peculiar in that you look at United's starting back five. De Gea's actually had a decent season. Dalot, up until the World Cup, was having a very good season. Martinez has been one of the signs of the season. Varane's been good this season. Shaw's been good this season. Yet you look at the amount of goals they've conceded, and something just doesn't compute there. I suppose what I would say is that it doesn't take it out of context as such, but they've had a few absolute hammerings. City away, Liverpool away, Brentford away, where they've conceded, I mean, goodness me, how many goals they conceded in those games? 17 goals. So,
and obviously, if you add in the Arsenal, the Arsenal was only 3-2 to be fair, but obviously,
that's 20 goals conceded in 4 defeats away from home. So that's a huge chunk of the goals they've conceded. It's more than 50% actually. Looking at the against column there, so I suppose they can say, well, we can dismiss these games. They were just bad days at the office, and we can cut them out next season, but it doesn't feel like they're going to make many adjustments to the defence in the summer other than getting I think, as I said, if Maguire or Lindelof go, they have to get a centre back in. But the priority is a striker, and obviously if they've got 2 players banging in goals every week, then that's going to do the goal difference wonders. But it's certainly something that has to be addressed, but they do intend to address it.
That's the clear area for improvement for me next season, isn't it? It's the biggest criticism this season, where they've went away to decent sides and they've kind of collapsed or capitulated sometimes in spectacular fashion. We'll just end it there, Samuel. Any exciting plans this bank holiday weekend after your trip to Old Trafford tomorrow? Or what you got planned for Sunday?
No, I'm going to just have to put it over to Carrington now for the press conference, and then the game tomorrow, and hopefully the weather is as bright as it is today, so I can get out and about and avoid eating any meat and potato pies at Old Trafford as well. This is my government health warning to the
I'll be scoffing my face with Easter eggs, and I'll be watching the Masters, feet up, reporting on the game tomorrow, and I'll enjoy Masters Sunday.
That sounds like the best plan to have. Yeah,
hopefully Rory McIlroy has a good round today, because as usual he came out first round and was incredibly underwhelming. I kind of fell for the trap back in McIlroy this year, unfortunately. Thank you very much for your time, Samuel.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it.
And thanks to listeners as usual. Have a great weekend. Enjoy your bank holiday if you have the benefit of it. Take care.